What's up, guys? It's Lawrence. Thanks for stopping by my channel. If you like what you see, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The other day I made a video about this topic, but unfortunately I set the camera in slow-mo, so it did not turn out the way I wanted it to. So with that aside, let's try this one again, folks. Here we go. The other day, Thursday, January 30th, was the 7-year anniversary in the decision in a court case. And since it pertains to radio, that's one of my passions in life, the entertainment industry in general. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at what happened in this case. And, we got to rerun the timeline a little bit here. 1992, October. Bubba the Love Sponge, real name Todd Clem, goes to 93.3 WFLZ to be the nighttime host. February 1994, MJ Kelly, real name Todd Schnitt, comes to 93.3 WFLZ to be the morning show host for the MJ and BJ Morning Show. December 1996, Bubba the Love Sponge moves to mornings on 98 Rock. The stipulation is that the two broadcasters, even though they are competitors, they can't talk smack about each other. Well, both those guys broke those rules. Manson did a song about how MJ was a short person, only played once, and then it was never played on 98 Rock ever again. And one morning on 93.3, MJ was talking about how people don't know the real Bubba because MJ, he had a guy show up at one of his events, and they were trying to get the guy help, and turns out that the Bubba guys, they did their research, and they uncovered that the guy was a convicted child molester, and MJ was trying to deny it, so there was that whole thing. There's an article about that somewhere. If I can find it, I'll post the link to it in the description. So in February of 2001, BJ from the MJ and BJ show, he leaves. We later found out it was because he was battling a drug problem. He eventually got clean. And so it was the MJ Morning Show from that point on. February of 2004, Bubba was fired by Clear Channel for quote-unquote indecency and $755,000 fine, all that stuff. 2 years later, Howard Stern brought him to Sirius Satellite Radio. Bubba began really reaping in the rewards, but Sirius Satellite Radio was not willing to pay him a fair wage. So in order to compensate, Bubba had to take another gig to support himself and the crew financially, so they had to go back to morning radio. This time they were on 102.5 The Bone. This is January of 2008, by the way. And so they were on Cox, so which means that they could now say whatever they wanted about MJ and everyone at Clear Channel. And so they did. They started right in saying that MJ was not the guy everybody thought he was. He's very hokey, saying that his show is just overhyped. It's all fake. It's just regurgitated stuff from tabloid programs, and that he's a midget with pubic hair on top of his head. And MJ did not take too kindly to this at all, so he filed a lawsuit. Rather than use his platform to bash Bubba, he decides, no, I'm going to go through the legal system because I'm too afraid to deal with this on the air. Now, it should be interesting to note that in August of 2008, a guy by the name of Phil Campbell was arrested for a DUI. Now, interestingly enough, Phil Campbell is a lawyer, and at one time was Bubba's lawyer for a freedom of speech case. There was a news article, there was a news clip the guys had played about a woman talking about a drunk driving incident, and the Bubba guys thought that she was being coached and was not being sincere, and so it led to a lawsuit. But I think Bubba won the lawsuit, if I remember correctly. But so in August 2008, Phil Campbell, as I say, gets busted for a DUI. Phil Campbell at the time represented MJ. And the Bubba guys were saying, wait a minute, shouldn't this be a conflict of interest? And evidently nobody else saw it that way. So they were unable to get him disqualified. Now, 4.5 years later, in January of 2013, after this whole thing went to trial, the verdict came down in favor of Bubba. MJ lost. But it should be interesting to note that when all was said and done, both men pretty much lost. MJ lost the case and Bubba lost an attorney. During the trial period, both legal teams one night went to this place called O'Malley's in Tampa. They're having a good time. And then the next morning, we learned that Phil Campbell was arrested for a DUI the second time. Now, the way it works, I guess, in Florida is that if you're a lawyer and you've been busted for a DUI twice in a certain time span, then you are no longer allowed to practice law for the next 10 years. Well, it turns out that it was all a setup. It was all a setup. Evidently, Steve Diaco, Bubba's lawyer, had texted one of his cop friends and falsely set up Phil Campbell for a DUI. Texted him and said, hey, look, man, just give you a little bit of tip. I'm at this bar with Phil Campbell. He's drinking this amount of alcohol. You might want to check him for a DUI. Just letting you know. So the arresting officer, months later, fired. And then a couple of years later, the state of Florida comes down and says to Steve Diaco, nope, sorry, permanently barred from practicing law in Florida. Now, I know that lawyers, the common rap on lawyers is that they play dirty. They're really dirty, they're slimy, all that stuff. Say what you will, say what you will about them. But I've never heard of a lawyer going so low that he would try and set up the opponent for a DUI. I've never heard of that before, ever. I mean, that's pretty damn disgraceful, if you ask me. Now, here's something interesting. Around the same time Phil was busted for a DUI the first time in August of 2008, some audio emerged of MJ talking about, he was talking to one of his coworkers about drunk driving, and he says, if anybody on this show gets a DUI, I fire you. Well, that just proves he's not a man of his word, because in August of 2004, he had an intern who admitted to driving while drunk, and he threw out of the studio for X amount of weeks. He would often taunt around there, like he called her a liquor lady one day. And so they eventually compromised to have her recreate the evening, but then take a field sobriety test. And she was drunk. She learned her lesson, all that stuff, but did he fire her? No, because she was an intern, evidently. If he truly was a man of his word, he would have fired her right then and there. He would have dropped her from the program. But nope, didn't work out that way. Then when the court case finally ended in January of 2013, I remember the following morning Bubba was talking about the case, and someone had asked him, what about the briefcase? And Bubba said, well, had Phil had the briefcase with him, we would have lost the case. Now, could that be a sign of something? I don't know. But what I do know is that MJ, he also has an afternoon show, the Schnitt Show, where he's an ultra-conservative trying to be like Rush Limbaugh kind of person. And so he comes on there and he goes, we lost the case. And he goes, I stand by the First Amendment. Well, if he truly stood behind the First Amendment, he wouldn't have filed this lawsuit, because he wouldn't have filed a lawsuit over being called a midget with pubic hair on his head. He would have just said, all right, well, Bubba said this about me, I'm going to say this about him on my program to try and fight back, try and fight fair. That would almost be like if Tom Leykis sued Phil Hendry because of Phil's impersonation of him. That would be like if Don and Mike sued Opie and Anthony, or Don Imus suing Howard Stern, or, well, actually that has happened before. Mancow has been involved in a couple of lawsuits, different radio personality. He's been involved in a couple of lawsuits. I think Steve Dahl and Keith Van Horn. You can look those up if you want. Mancow versus Steve Dahl or Janet Dahl, and Mancow versus Keith Van Horn. You can look those up too. And just to give you an idea as to how Sue happy this MJ character is, back in 2007, he put up some billboards that made fun of Britney Spears and her mental condition at the time. and Britney Spears' camp almost sued Clear Channel, and Clear Channel took the billboards down, and MJ was really pissed about that. I got a video where I talk about that, and I'll be putting a link to that in the description. But just interesting little thing about Phil is that Phil actually was sued for an impersonation of a real individual. Brian Cox, years ago, had a radio show called The Brian Cox Show. He was this football player from Miami Dolphins. And so at the same time Brian Cox had The Brian Cox Show on WQAM, Phil did his interpretation of it on WIOD, also called The Brian Cox Show. And he would say stuff like, "Man, this is Brian Cox, and I really wish that our wide receiver would quit using so much damn Jerry Curl in the locker room," stuff like that. And Brian was not amused, and so one night he's being interviewed on WIOD on the Dolphins Network. And he looks at the microphone that says WIOD, and he goes, "Is this WIOD?" The guy goes, "Yep," and he goes, "Suck my dick." But they couldn't edit it in time, so it went out over the air. So the next day, Phil goes in the air with Brian Cox, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brian Cox. I'm a homosexual male, and I'm getting married to my radio partner. And Terry Goldberg and I, we're going to get married. It's going to be great." And Brian Cox was very upset, sued Phil for $15 million. But eventually the two made peace. It was at a Christmas party. And Brian Cox said that moment convinced him to become a broadcaster. So there it is, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, it's Lawrence. Well, that's the end of the video, but before I go, I want to thank you guys for checking out the content. If you like, you can check out my radio show every Friday evening at 7 p.m. on RazRadioLive.com. That's R-A-S RadioLive.com, RadioChaos.net, and in this case, it's chaos with a K, K-A-O-S, RadioChaos.net, or NoNameNetwork.net. It's called the LRWS, and check it out. We also have a store, teespring.com, T-E-E, spring.com/stores/LRWS. And if you want, you can check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/LRoss1987. Thanks for watching.